Oh, no, you're not.
Hi, everyone. Hi, thanks for joining us this evening, not least because we stand between a very long day of fringes for most of you and your first drink or dinner of the evening. So particularly thanks for all for coming this evening. My name's Jo Blackman. I am on the exec of SERA, which is Labour's affiliated environmental organisation. I'm also a Labour councillor and cabinet member for the environment in the London Borough of Redbridge. And I also, with another hat, spend some time advising NGOs on their campaign strategies as well. It's really great to be here today. I will introduce the amazing panel shortly, but first of all, I'll just say a few words to give the discussion some context. I think it's fair to say this is a very topical issue, which maybe explains why we have still got some people here, even though we're very close to dinner and drinks. We've had Ed Miliband's speech today, which comes hot on the tails of a series of really disastrous announcements from the Tories, including their decision towards a new round of oil and gas licences, as well as other various measures which risk setting us back many years in terms of climate change. It's been really exciting to see Labour's vision develop for clean energy superpower. That's included various announcements over the last few years, including 28 billion funding commitment, Green Prosperity Plan, GB Energy, windfall tax, National Wealth Fund, and just this week, if you couldn't keep up with all of that, we've had new announcements on the grid and an energy independence bill. So those are obviously really exciting opportunities for the country and the climate and the economy, but also present lots of challenges in terms of how we can do that transition, which is much needed to clean energy in a way that is managed and does what it needs to do for bills, for the economy, but also for workers and communities that also will be facing quite significant change. And I think it's great that SERA is able to provide a platform for this discussion tonight, because they've really been at the forefront of developing Labour's position over many years, predating my involvement by a long time, both in terms of shaping Labour's position on oil and gas licences and measures in relation to that, but also in developing some of the ideas we see behind Great British Energy as well. So it's really great they're able to continue helping that discussion today. In terms of the panel, we have had some changes to what you might have seen advertised. We were hoping that Professor Tavis from Aberdeen University would join, but sadly he couldn't make it due to some of the issues with trains in Scotland that we've seen. But we've got a really great panel. Thanks, Gwen, for stepping in. Gwen is Head of Public Affairs at Uplift, and they've done a huge amount really to get the issue of energy and oil need for a transition away from oil and gas onto the public agenda. We've got Richard Hardy from Prospect, their General Secretary for Scotland, who's also done a lot of thinking and is very involved in Scottish debates around just transition. We've got Rosemary Harris, who is, as of today, campaigning with Oil Change International, and as of yesterday was platform, but has played a really pivotal role and was co-author of a report, Our Power, setting out some of the measures that are needed for a just transition. And last but not least, we've got Alan Whitehead, who is the Shadow Labour Minister for Energy. I'm sure you'll tell me I've not got quite exact.
Security.
Energy security, there we go. And Alan's really got for anyone who's spoken to him, they'll know not only very passionate and engaged, he's also got a huge amount of knowledge and experience as well, which is really developing Labour's position. So I'm going to kick off by asking Gwen to come in and share her perspective from a Uplift perspective on some of the challenges and why this energy transition is so critical.
Thanks so much, Jo, and thanks so much for convening this space to have this discussion. So I guess I'll just start off by, laying out why we kind of need to get to this place in the first place, and why the energy transition is so critical. We know that there's obviously a climate change imperative. We know that in order to keep 1.5 alive, we must keep fossil fuels in the ground. But I think, as has been laid out by Ed Miliband so clearly today, there is a real keen energy security dimension to this as well. So the UK is the largest producer, or sorry, the second largest producer of oil and gas in Europe. And that extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea has led to the UK becoming over-reliant on oil and gas. So we use a lot of gas for heating our homes and also for the power generated here in the UK. Now, when that comes to things like spikes in the international energy price, it means that in the UK, we're incredibly vulnerable to those changes, and things like our housing stock, which is very poorly insulated. And again, that sort of reliance on fossil fuels means that, folks across the UK have been really at the brunt of what has been sort of an international crisis. Indeed, actually last winter, the IMF confirmed that the UK had the highest energy bills in Western Europe, and that was due to our reliance on fossil fuels and also from our inefficient housing stock. Again, so we've heard that Labour are going to be introducing an Energy Independent Act that was announced over the weekend, and Ed Miliband has laid out a bit more about that this afternoon. What's interesting is that ideas about energy independence and moving away from fossil fuels has already been thought about from sort of academics. So UCL academics, how the UK could become energy and found that the UK could be entirely fossil free by as early as 2045. And so that's a move away from fossil fuels and really sort of ramping up renewables, insulating homes, transitioning towards electric vehicles, all the things that we know not only are a sort of a climate imperative, can also homes and increase sort of public support and that kind of thing as well. I think what's really important in this debate and this conversation that we're having this evening is remembering that the North Sea is a declining basin, and multiple models show that because of the declining basin, a business as usual approach will lead to job losses no matter what. So I think discussions like this are so important. And I think Labour's position on ending new oil and gas licenses and ensuring a just transition is really essential, that we're kind of making sure that the workforce are very much part of that discussion, and that this can be a managed transition. Otherwise, we could, if it was business as usual, just get to a cliff edge. So I think really important that the building blocks are put in today. And then just to talk a little bit about how sort of, I guess, like the government has done energy transition so far. So there's the North Sea Transition Deal, which was the sort of flagship deal between the oil and gas industry and government. So that is all about transitioning to sort of cleaner cleaner energy and sort of decarbonising oil and gas power. But workers weren't involved in that, and we know that it was essentially drafted by the oil and gas industry. So I think going forward, things like the North Sea Transition Deal could be looked at again to make sure that workers could be involved in that development as well. So there's real opportunities here for Labour to really lead on this, not only on the international picture and moving forward away from oil and gas in a way that is internationally regarded, and I think there's huge opportunities there, but also to make sure that sort of workforces across the UK are really sort of supported and empowered throughout that transition as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Gwen, for that introduction, helping set the scene for our debate. Rosemary, do you want to talk through some of the recommendations from your ALPAR report?
So I for the last 2.5 years, I've been working with offshore oil and gas workers in the North Sea to produce a report that came out earlier this year, which lays out 10 demands that were kind of designed by the workers for a transition away from oil and gas. So that involved kind of hundreds of phone calls, over 3,000 workers filling in surveys, supporting the demands and also giving their opinions, 40 workers attending in-person workshops, and many, many trips to Aberdeen. And the demands range from quite like nuts and bolts things of what workers need now, looking at kind of funded training opportunities, jobs guarantees, right up to the need for public energy and a reorganization of the tax system so that it works for the people and not for the companies, and for not basically a lot of them are looking at their wages declining and their bosses making huge profits. I think before we kind of talk about what we need a just transition to look like from Labour and for the North Sea, I think we need to kind of talk about what a just transition is in general, because I think the phrase is being used a lot at the moment and maybe is starting to lose some of its meaning. So it was an idea developed by workers and their unions in the 70s in America. And it was the idea that workers should be able to lead and demand changes to their industries to avoid environmental harm without negatively impacting their jobs and the economic futures of their communities. And I think that it's really important to center that, so that when we hear government figures, we hear politicians, we hear industry talking about just transition, we know what a just transition is and isn't. And why is that something that's important? First of all, for the UK, there's a moral argument to it. We have a history of failed industrial transitions, and we can't make communities, many of whom have already borne the brunt of those failed transitions, bear that brunt again. But there's also a pragmatic argument to a just transition. We can't win without Labour on side. We cannot phase out oil and gas without Labour on side. So we need to be looking at a just transition. And also, the more we do to engage people and bring them along with us, it continues to counter the kind of alienation that actually is leading to the far-right populism that we're seeing in the UK at the moment. So what does a fair transition look like? It should be worker-led, and that doesn't mean consulting a few workers for buy-in to ideas that you already have. It means actually starting with asking them questions and being led by those questions. And it needs to start now. It isn't fair if it comes at the sacrifice of people in the global south, even if here we're fine for a few more years. I'm not sure, for me, like what the utility at this point is to pick an arbitrary date that I think we need to have phased out by, when the reality is that it just needs to start now, and it needs to go as quickly as humanly possible. But it needs to also support workers, and it needs to work with the workers and communities most impacted. And these things need to happen at the same time. We need to start phasing out, and we need to start designing a just transition. We can't wait for the perfect just transition plan to start phasing out, and we can't only start phasing out when we already know what we're doing. The policy specifics are in a very, very long report, and I don't have time to read them out. But I have a couple of copies with me if anyone's interested. But I guess what I would kind of put to Labour is, from 1964, when the UK Continental Shelf Act was passed, which opened up the North Sea, a decade of targeted policies, legislation and investment took the UK to a place where it became the financial hub for oil and gas. Nearly every building in the UK was connected to gas, and an entire trained workforce was in the North Sea. So the idea that anything less than that kind of intent would be needed for another transition away from oil and gas it just doesn't work. And that's something that the Labour Party need to reckon with. This needs to be something that the whole government, the whole parliament is looking at, from the workplace to energy to education to housing, and that's how we secure a just transition. I think that the question that was kind of put to us as the panel, how do we secure a fair and just transition away from oil and gas? And I think that there's an elephant in this room, and I'd be remiss not to observe that if we're serious about a just transition with any kind of global perspective, we need to consider how appropriate it is that this tent is sponsored by RWE, who are a major fossil fuel company. They're the single largest emitters in Europe as of 2021, and they're currently suing the government of the Netherlands over their plans to phase out coal. If we genuinely want to embrace and engage with a just transition, we need to start by seeing through the false rhetoric of energy companies claiming to care about a just transition while doing everything they can to halt meaningful progress towards it. It's my view that these companies shouldn't even have a place at the table, but even if you don't agree with that, we should at least be able to agree that they shouldn't be sponsoring the table.
Thank you, Rosemary, for that contribution. Maybe just respond briefly on the RWE point that has been raised in other panels, and RWE respond themselves as well. So I'm obviously not speaking on their behalf, but just to say that has been raised directly with SERA, who assured us they have undertaken due diligence to ensure it's a local policy. and that I think the approach that SERA takes, which is in contrast to maybe an NGO position on this, is that that you need to engage with the companies as part of that transition, and that RWE are one of the big players in terms of renewables, and in fact a significant provider of renewables in this country. But maybe I'll move on to Alan to maybe respond from Labour's perspective to some of the points he's. Oh, sorry, actually, Alan, I was meant to go to Richard. Sorry, Richard first, and then Alan.
I don't feel unloved at all. Thanks, Joe. So I'm Richard Hardy. I'm National Secretary with the Trade Union Prospect. I suspect the reason that I'm here, though, is because I'm also a member of the Scottish Government's Just Transition Commission. Should probably tell you a little bit about who Prospect is. We are the biggest union that you've never heard of. We are the 7th biggest union in the TUC. Our members are nuclear scientists, playwrights, veterinary surgeons, and museums. More specifically, in the offshore, in an offshore context, we represent over 1,000 members who work in regulation, in health and safety, and we are the biggest union for rotary wing operations for all staff, including pilots, mechanics, and ground staff. I've been a member of the Scottish Government's Just Transition Commission since its inception in 2019. We're now on to our second iteration, and I'm one of only 3 commissioners, myself, Lang Banks from WWF, and Rachel McEwen from SSE, who sat on both commissions. And if you're an avid watcher of climate politics, you'll know that our chair, until recently Jim Ski, has recently become the head of the IPCC. And I think that speaks volumes for the work that we've done. I also want to pay tribute to Rosemary and Platform. One of the most authentic evidence gathering sessions that we actually undertook as part of the first Just Transition Commission was commissioned by Platform and gave us access to offshore workers who are often reticent in coming forward to speak about their concerns into their own union because of the way that many workers have been treated in the offshore sector over the years. I wanted to talk, however, mostly about Just Transition, and actually to echo some of what Rosemary said. Our speeches do overlap a little bit, but we didn't share beforehand. I've been a trade unionist for 33 years, and I'm actually pretty fed up with businesses and politicians and the Daily Mail telling me what a just transition means, because I know what it means, because it's a trade union concept. It comes from the trade union movement. It comes from actually wider than Rosemary said in terms of just coming from America. It comes out of things like the TGWU's Lucas Plan for defence diversification in the 1970s. It runs through the Australian Builders Union green bands that saved the rocks in Sydney, if you've ever been. That was all going to be redeveloped until the union stepped in and stopped it. So I know that it means that it's about workers and their communities not paying the price of all of the energy changes that we've done before. So I come from a pit village in Yorkshire. I'm the first member of my family not to work for the NCB for well over 100 years. So I know what a bad transition looks like. And it's absolutely vital that we get that transition right so that workers, communities, and those least able to pay don't carry the can for the decisions that they're not making. We've seen it happen before. We must make sure that it doesn't happen again. So I don't need businesses and the Daily Mail telling me what just transition is. The policy, the concepts of just transition are out there. They're enshrined in ILO agreements. They don't need any further discussion. But we are really at a defining moment for just transition, because we're really in danger of building what I call a field of dreams approach to just transition. That if we do net zero, just transition will simply happen, and it won't. Okay, it's absolutely fallacious to believe that if net zero, a just transition will toddle along behind it and deliver for workers and their communities. It won't. What it will do is it'll just continue inequalities that have been built up under a fossil fuel economy, but they'll just be delivered under a green economy instead. So we've got to have that conversation, and we've got to see delivery of real tangible change and benefit for workers that will be delivered out of net zero, so that populism from certain political can be combated with real actual achievements. Because at the moment, what we're getting is about the number of bins that people are supposed to have. And it's you know, people in this room can have, I don't need to convince you that that's gaslighting. When I go and I speak to members, and I speak to members on behalf, not just my own union, but other unions as well, or when I get asked, what's the benefit? What's in it for me? To put just transition at the 4.0, not being on time. So through the change to net zero to deliver a more equitable society. So instead of getting net zero, just transition on to the end of net zero, what we need is a strategy that sets out what is the society that we want to build going to look like, and how are we going to deliver an industrial strategy to get us there? Because that's how you deliver net zero, not designing a net zero strategy and hoping that capitalism, out of its great glorious kindness of being, will deliver a just transition. John Maynard Keynes put that out in the 1930s. It begs belief that we're still having to have that conversation later. Close on one other blocker. So as we seek to achieve these tangible outcomes for workers, one of the things that we see in public procurement is public lawmakers or public legal advisors finding ways that we shouldn't do things because government, councils, democratic structures are risk averse. So politicians say, we would like to have more local content in our public procurement. What do the lawyers say about that? Lawyers will find you lots of reasons not to do it. It seems to be a peculiarly British disease, right? When you go abroad, if you look at public procurement policies in Spain, Turkey, France, India, Australia, America, I could go on and on and on. Their public procurement seems to be driven by, let's find ways to do it, not let's find lots of legal reasons why we might be at risk. Let's blame the WTO. Oh, we can't do it. We might get into trouble with the WTO. Does anybody know anybody that's ever got into trouble with the WTO? So I've got an ask for the Labour Party. What we need is the Labour Party to tell us the sort of society that they want to build. We need them to tell us how a green industrial strategy is going to get us there. We need them to stop being risk averse about giving us real examples that we can tell them about. So when they're reading in the Daily Mail and the Express and the Sun and all those terrible other papers about how, Labour is coming for their cars and their bacon sandwiches, and, it'll be 14 bins in the back garden before you know what's happening, we can actually say, no, it delivered this factory, it delivered these jobs in making these wind turbines, it delivered a real just transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Richard. Lots of food for thought. Alan, could you maybe share where your thinking and Labour's thinking currently is at on some of the issues we've heard around just transition?
Well, yeah, the first important point, I think, to be clear about is what, as far as the Labour Party is concerned, are we aiming for the green transition to be? And in this instance, it is to get us to a position where oil and gas are so marginal in the UK economy that they only undertake very residual functions in the economy. Everything else is not powered by oil or gas. And that may well coincide, and I'll come back to that in a minute, may well coincide, at least in part, with the fact that oil and gas in the North Sea is part of a declining and very mature field and will naturally decline over a period of time. And provided we plan a transition well, then the elements of production that will continue in the North Sea will actually mean that as far as a number of people in the oil and gas industry are concerned, there will be good jobs and employment for them for a number of years to come. But of course, that, as we know, doesn't remotely make up for the jobs and so on that there have been in the oil and gas industry in the past, or even that there are in the present. So we've actually got to plan the transition in such a way that not only are those people who are in the oil and gas industry have been in the past are not, as we saw in the last big energy transition, that was the transition away from coal, are not stranded in places where there's no work. Communities are completely crushed as a result of those changes, and you got results from that sort of completely non-just transition actually last to this day. So one of the keys, I think, to that transition, and by the way, I mean, as far as our policy, which I'm particularly proud to be associated with, which is that we have said no new oil and gas exploration licenses in the North Sea ever for the future, should there be a Labour government. That's just the starting point of what we've got to do to get to that position of oil and gas providing a very residual function in an overwhelmingly low carbon energy economy future. And of course, there will be a number of other things attached to that, which actually, by a variety of actions, drives down the amount of oil and gas there is in the economy and aids that transition. For example, Labour's plan for insulating 19 million homes and increasing the energy efficiency of our homes generally to a level that is actually is compatible with net zero outcomes. Well, that will not only push people's bills down very considerably, will increase energy security, will combat fuel poverty, but as it happens, that particular policy will result in something like 30% less gas coming into our economy to heat homes in the way that is happening at the moment. So something like 30% of gas that is coming into the energy economy goes into either heating homes and a further percentage goes into providing power. So if you've got a combination of the fact that you've removed a lot of gas from heating homes, you've also, as we know from the our ambition now to have a completely renewable low carbon power system by 2030, then the gas that goes into the power system, but roughly a third gas goes domestic heating, a third of gas goes into generating the gas that goes into power stations, or using gas to generate the power in power stations. That gas will be taken completely to the margins of the power system and will actually no longer function in the power system. So that's another 30% of gas gone out of the system. So the transition is a variety of techniques which will, as I say, have the effect of getting gas and oil to that very residual part of the system. But the question then is, in terms of a just transition from that process to a position where we can say our energy system now is pretty resilient and working without gas or oil in it, what role can those people who have worked in the oil and gas industry and have a proud tradition of building it up and working very hard to make sure that the oil and gas industry was as good as it had been, and by the way, was substantially unionized in the process. So unlike what is happening with a lot of renewables, is that actually those industries are just not unionized, and indeed the terms and conditions in those industries are dubious, to say the least, in many instances. So how can those people who have been working in the oil and gas industry firstly have a not just a hand but a leading hand in actually creating and bringing about the industries which are going to be a part of the transition, that is wind, solar, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, all the other things that are going to be a part of that low energy system, and need an enormous amount of work to be done on to get them into place. And one of the things that always sort of worries me is when we talk about the North Sea energy, then we quite often talk about the North Sea as if it were energy just relating to oil and gas. Well, the North Sea actually is the sum of oil and gas and wind and what will happen on carbon capture and storage, what may well happen on offshore production of hydrogen, all sorts of things such as that, which, among other things, ought to be the field in which a huge proportion of the skills and the investment in working life that those people working in the oil and gas industry have undertaken ought to be the realm whereby, as it were, the next job for those people is to build that low carbon energy economy in the North Sea in particular. And what we want to do is to make sure this is the case by, among other things, making sure that you have an authority for the North Sea, which genuinely can plan what is happening in the North Sea as far as energy is concerned, in such a way that people do get a fair deal in those new industries, that they can get a fair deal on a place base from where they are at the moment, and they are able to, as it were, be masters of the new transition rather than victims of transition for the future. Now, government at the moment, for example, has got a thing called North Sea Transition Authority, which I can assure you is a made-up name. It is actually the Oil and Gas Authority rebadged by the government as the North Sea Transition Authority. It has no substance in legislation or anything else. Authority. What we need a real transition authority, which actually will be enshrined in legislation. That's one of the things that will be perhaps subject to the Energy Independence Act coming forward, so that there is a very clear handle on how that transition works in terms of what is going into the North Sea, what conditions there will be, a variety of things, including substantial onshoring, terms and conditions, protection, let's say unionisation, so that the terms and conditions that there are in the new energy economy are as good as they were in the old energy economy. So those are the practical things that we will want to do as far as giving that transition proper effect concerned. And I know part of your study, part of your studies previously was exactly what percentage of the sort of jobs that were in the gas and oil industry can actually realistically be translated with a plan behind it to the new energy. About 70–80%, I think. So, I mean, that's the sort of starting point for making that transition work. And I think it's really important, as already stated on this platform, that we don't indeed take the easy route and just say, indeed, we'll have the transition and somehow things will follow. We've actually got to plan it very specifically and very straightforward so that it works properly. And indeed, that is what we are committed to do over a period, so that when we land in the low carbon economy, it will be because everyone has had a hand in bringing that low carbon economy forward, and not because a load of people have been left behind as a result of that low carbon economy taking shape.
Thank you, Alan. That was really helpful, comprehensive response. I want to open it up for questions. Mike?
Hi, thanks for all the intervention. I'm David Hillman, Director of Stamp Out Poverty, but we're also the UK partner of the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative, talking about the different renewables, wind, wave and solar being developed. But I wanted to ask about carbon capture and storage. A lot of people think that that is a kind of dangerous diversion, a kind of continuation of fossil fuel production by the back door. And it'd be very interesting to hear the views of the panel.
Thanks. I think we'll take them in groups of three. Do you want to do, should we do groups of three, Alice? Okay. Yeah.
Hello, Martin Plaut. I'm a SERA member. First, just a point of information. Slovak Republic, Hungary, Poland, European Union, United States, European Union, United States, Peru, European Union, United Kingdom, China. These are just some of the people who've been most recently taken to court and dealt with by the World Trade Organization. So it's not true that they don't do anything. The colleague who said she had a bookload of fantastic ideas didn't share one of them with us. Could she perhaps just choose 2 or 3 of the most interesting ideas which would actually work, that would help us to this just transition? Because at the moment, I don't know what a just transition would look like. Thank you.
Maybe just one more.
Hi, Leo Burger from Air Products. We are the largest hydrogen producer in the world at the moment. I was very curious to hear more about the Independence Act for energy. Is there a role for renewable energy trade and also import renewable energy in the UK to lower the cost price of renewable energy over here?
Thanks for those questions. Maybe should we take the one on carbon capture storage first? I don't know if anyone wants to come in on that one, Gwen?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. I'm sure others have thoughts as well. I think most climate modelings use some sort of CCUS, but I think what's really important is that CCUS isn't just used as an excuse to continue extraction of more fossil fuels. So we know that, say for instance, there is really hard to decarbonise sectors, big industrial sectors, but which might require some CCUS. But what's really important is that it's used as an excuse for more fossil fuel extraction. Thoughts on about the actual efficacy of CCUS?
can I just add something to that in terms of what is important with the energy transition overall is being very clear what the various devices that we are going to employ in the energy transition can do and should do and can't do and shouldn't do. So a big debate, for example, at the moment about what role hydrogen is going to play in the low carbon economy. It's not going to heat all our homes. It's going to do certain things such as in long distance transport, logistics, a number of functions in energy intensive industry and so on. And that's or should be pretty much in the field of those industries which are extremely difficult to decarbonize unless you put carbon capture and storage on the end of them. And that doesn't, for example, mean you carry on with a gas-fired power station and you put carbon capture and storage on the end of the gas-fired power station and it continues as previously. It's a specific series of functions that carbon capture and storage can do under particular circumstances. And of course, what that does mean is that you've got, running the whole carbon capture and storage system together, you've got to have carrying capacity for that carbon capture and sequestering capacity, which in this instance would be in the North Sea. And indeed, as far as the carbon capture and storage industry is concerned, assuming other European countries are also doing carbon capture and storage in that particular way, then the opportunities in the North Sea for carbon capture, and particularly the sequestration part of carbon capture, to be, as it were, an international facility as well as a UK resource, are potentially very substantial. Now, the way you do all that is remarkably similar to a lot of the things that have been done in the oil and gas industry in the North Sea in the past. So you can see very clearly that a lot of the work that would need to be done on that can and should be done by exactly the workforce that were involved in oil and gas previously. And indeed, it shouldn't be the case that you shut all the facilities down in the North Sea and then start up carbon capture facilities with other lot of facilities. So share them and use them and make sure you don't decommission them so they can be used for these purposes. And that indeed means that you've got a very substantial number of jobs, not just short term, but very long term, secure jobs in both those facilities and actually managing them for the future.
Thanks, Alan. I think, Richard, you wanted to come in on this point too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to lay the point that previous speakers have made because I think they make very good points. I think the question's a really good one, and we shouldn't be using CCUS as a way of continuing the way that we've done. But as has been identified, there are a lot of industries that take a long time to decarbonise, and this is one way of doing it. The IPCC has recognised that. It models in carbon capture, and as Alan has indicated, that you will not replace every production job in oil and gas with a production job in renewables. So there is a workforce out there that will struggle to retrain, will struggle to reskill, and this is one way of addressing that through a just transition.
Thanks, Richard. And Rosemary, I thought you actually shared lots of useful recommendations. I'm sorry the speaker might not have picked up on them, but do you want to take this opportunity to
Sure.
see with more detail?
I also just quickly want to come in on CCS. Sometimes I feel a bit crazy to talk about CCS because it's been proven to not work, but it's still in all of the models for carbon reduction, and every year it just continues to not work. And it really concerns me that we're planning on jobs. We're relying on CCS to provide jobs to people, relying on CCS to reduce our emissions. And more evidence that it doesn't work. So that's just a little bit on CCS. Yeah, I mean, I can spout off a few of the policies that are in this report. I'd encourage you to read it if you're interested. But an offshore training passport for workers, which means that their skills are recognized in both oil and gas and renewables, which means they can work in both. A training levy on industry, and that money would be used to fund retraining for workers that can't immediately get jobs in renewables or maybe don't want to continue to work in offshore work. A permanent windfall tax on industry profits, regional public energy companies, collective bargaining agreements for renewables workers, which set wage floors, collective bargaining agreements that cover not just permanent core staff, but also workers that are on temporary contracts and or are self-employed. I'll stop there because we don't have that much time.
Thanks, Rosemary. And I think this is. So I definitely recommend the report for anyone who wanted to get a bit more detail on that as well. I think the last question was around renewables energy trade. I don't know if there was. Sorry, it fell.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure of the exact purport of the question. I mean, if it, do you mean how renewables can trade into the system so that actually we get much cheaper energy into the system than we would do under fossil fuel arrangements?
The current discussion is much about trade of fossil fuels, of course, across the world. We believe as a hydrogen company that also hydrogen will be traded around the world as a commodity. And to provide a baseload supply to everyone around the world and also import and export, we're wondering where does hydrogen fit in that import and export story when you think about a Energy Independence Act. So just the Labour Party sees a role also for import of renewable energy into the UK, next to be an exporter, as we believe hydrogen can be a traded commodity.
Yes, I mean, energy independence does not mean that you actually sit there on this island and say nothing is coming from anywhere else into the UK, and we're going to just trade on what we've got here, because there are a whole lot of trades that need to be made, for example, through interconnectors in terms of energy supply. And one thing, obviously, we've got to get right as far as interconnectors is that the interconnection supply is coming in on a low carbon basis as well. The hydrogen that we are producing, and clearly that needs to be green hydrogen rather than blue hydrogen, has got a number of roles in the energy economy, which I've outlined. One of the substantial roles that hydrogen, I think, will be in energy storage, so that we can actually rebalance the system on an interseasonal basis using hydrogen as an electricity store, and then bringing it out when the time is right as far as use within the energy system is concerned. And also there will be circumstances under which we may want to export hydrogen that we have produced in the UK. So hydrogen will have a number of uses in the UK economy, and indeed the building of hydrogen industry is also another part, I think, of the just transition, because an enormous amount of the sort of techniques and operations and arrangements are very similar to what we have had previously in the oil and gas industry, and will give very secure, very long-term employment as far as those people who are engaged in that industry are concerned. The question for government, frankly, is to balance the likely production of hydrogen over a period with genuine uses for that hydrogen, so that they are at the most economical cost for the energy economy as a whole. And one thing I know that is not a genuine and economical cost for hydrogen as a whole is to heat our homes. And with some exceptions, perhaps of hydrogen islands under some circumstances, I don't see a future for hydrogen in simply replacing gas in heating our homes across the country.
Thanks, Alan, for clarifying that. Richard, did you want to come in on hydrogen as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just picking up on Alan's last point, what we need is to create a domestic industry. We need a plan. We need to effectively build it from scratch, and we need to start a good number of years behind lots of people that we're going to be in competition with in relation to hydrogen production. I think it's important that we have a plan for UK domestic hydrogen use, and I don't disagree with Alan in any way, shape or form in relation to domestic heating. I guess one of the concerns that I have is from the just transition side. I see lots of international just transition plans that talk about building domestic hydrogen industries so that countries can become hydrogen exporters. And now, you know, I do understand how capitalism works. I just don't like it very much. But I just have this sort of dystopian view of the world that everybody's creating hydrogen and shipping it next door. And it's just a knock-on effect, because you can't build a whole world of countries where everybody exports hydrogen. So I think the important thing is we get the domestic side of it right before we start running to build yet another market where we can move commodities around the world that maybe we don't need to.
Thanks, Richard. I think we'll take another round of questions, if that's all right, Alice. I'll let you choose, given you have to run around with the mic.
Take one from the front.
Thank you very much. My name is David. I'm from a Norwegian energy company called Equinor. Thank you for a really interesting debate. On CCUS, so Norway, we've been storing CO2 for 20 years, and we recently signed contracts to ship CO2 from the Netherlands to Norway for storage. So Alan, we completely agree with your vision of the UK being part of that international storage opportunity for the continental Europe. I had a question on hydrogen, if that's okay, which is, do you think the development of the hydrogen market is moving fast enough to support the just transition, or is it just going to take what it takes to get going? Thanks.
And I'm going to take one from front, because then I can give the mic back.
I wanted to address the earlier point you made, that a couple of you made about the role of corporations versus or vis-a-vis workers in this. Basically, getting corporations to stop greenwashing feels like trying to get them to pay taxes, in the sense that if one government imposes higher taxes or imposes more mandatory green obligations, the corporation will just move things elsewhere and they evade each other. The only way around this really has been international corporations. So the EU, for example, imposing blanket taxes. Do you think a similar solution could be used to bring corporations further in line with what they need to be doing at the international level? And if so, what would that look like? And that's for the whole panel.
Okay, I'm being told that we probably don't have time for any more questions beyond those two. So let's take those both on. Oh, Alice, sorry. Very good. We gender balance. We maybe need it. It has been pointed out.
We've got 5 minutes. Honestly, you're not the people.
Okay, all right. Apologies, but with the opportunity for questioners to come and ask the panel after, and noted for future events. Thanks for flagging that up. Yeah, a question on hydrogen. Are we moving fast enough, and how do we make companies act? Who would like to take those? Gwen, do you want to have a first stab?
Yeah, happy to have a first stab at companies' action. I guess also just on the kind of slide comment about companies paying taxes. Obviously, after Labour's announcements on a windfall tax, what must have been a year ago or so, energy companies are now paying more taxes than they used to, and I think that should be continued, but that is starting to claw back some of those profits that were made in wartime. I think on international cooperation, I'm not not quite sure, but I think your comments around greenwashing are really clear. And I think, again, things like the North Sea transition deal, which I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't say that's so much about transition. It's about diversification, and it's how oil and gas companies can also go into things like renewables. But I think it's really interesting to note that the government and oil and gas industry, when they talk about transition and going low carbon, what they actually mean is reducing production emissions. So that's reducing the emissions that are created through extracting oil and gas. So that means essentially using wind turbines to produce oil and gas, which sounds ludicrous, but is genuinely what we're going for. So I think also just continuing to pick up on that greenwashing, calling it out is really, really important. So thanks for the question.
Thanks. And yeah, given time, I think these should be concluding remarks as well. Richard, do you want to come in?
So I think I touched on hydrogen before, so I'll concentrate on the greenwashing point. Some companies don't greenwash. They tend to be companies that have got strong trade unions in them. And I'll go back to the point that I made about public procurement. And you can use public procurement through, in Scotland, we have the Fair Work First approach to public procurement. Companies have to show that they give worker voice. Worker voice is measured through collective bargaining. And if we get smarter at using public procurement that says we will give contracts, we will work with companies that recognise unions in their workplace, give their workers a voice, and workers will stop greenwashing. That's a way of doing it that's it's a bit of stick, but it's not as big a stick as using taxation, because you're still saying if you want to come here and work, you've got to work within that process. So I think we need to be more innovative about finding ways to make companies do the right thing rather than just relying on the old tax and tax approach. But public procurement and fair work practices, that's a really good way of doing it.
Thanks, Richard. Rosemary?
Yeah, I think I also do not have the answer. But I think that what Rich said, I think like stronger trade unions within those companies would make a massive difference. I think that one way to massively reduce their ability to greenwash is that if people would stop accepting their money in exchange for greenwashing. And that genuinely is not a barbed comment. I think like they, fossil fuel companies sponsor like so much cultural stuff in the UK, but also internationally. And places could stop accepting that money. I also think there's something in like challenging like advertising rules. Everywhere we look, there is BP, Shell showing all the green stuff they're doing when that's like 3% of the stuff that they do. And so I think that we could either be looking at more robust advertising laws kind of like nationally or internationally. I guess we can't set international advertising rules. Also, we just take it into our own hands and take down their posters.
Thanks, Rosemary.
There are two sort of fairly random things I might say in response to those. The first one is we've actually got a system at the moment going into the retail market, which actually values gas far above renewables in terms of what comes out in the retail market. That's because you have a marginal cost price assessment, so that gas and fossil fuel companies make very large profits on the back of inflated prices in the energy markets, when actually not exactly with a stroke of a pen, but with actually some fairly concerted government intervention, you could actually sleeve through the renewable prices into the retail market to make a real number two, choke off excess profits from those fossil fuel companies that are getting away with a rigged market as far as retail energy is concerned. And secondly, bring a very substantial renewable price dividend to customers as far as their energy supplies are concerned. I'd also, one thing that does continue to worry me is the extent to which all sorts of efforts in the field of non-greenwashing, i.e. making sure that products are made with proper green and low carbon standards, that are then put on the market on that basis then appear not to be competitive with products that have come in from abroad, where they don't have the same standards in place, and they can then undercut those products, and then the market then says, well, we don't need those properly non-greenwash products in the market anyway, because we can get them from somewhere else. So one clear step forward for that would be the introduction of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which would actually make sure that what work had been done in bringing forward goods and services and so on a low carbon basis wasn't simply subverted by those sort of arrangements. And that's another thing government can do and probably quite transform the landscape for non-greenwashed, properly produced products in the future.
Thank you. I'm gonna wrap up now. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank our panel and also SERA volunteers who have made this event, and I think all 20 or so that are being organised possible. And have a lovely evening.